Ambassador Van Schaack, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you to start with Syria, because we are getting more and more complaints that actual, illegal non-intervention essentially is happening, that Bashar Assad is not allowing humanitarian access despite international law.
Indeed, the arbitrary withholding of humanitarian aid in an armed conflict situation can be a violation of the laws of war, and using starvation as a weapon of war is a criminally punishable war crime. Here we have a situation in which it seems that President Assad is limiting the ability of this region to receive humanitarian aid. And of course, this is a region that is largely controlled by rebel groups and opposition groups, which suggests that this is by design.
And he has complained, and his government is saying it's all because of sanctions imposed by the international community. But we've been told by US government, John Kirby, just on Friday, that there are exemptions and that sanctions do not limit humanitarian aid, especially in these circumstances. Is that correct, Ambassador?
Indeed, sanctions regimes have waivers within them for the provision of genuine humanitarian aid, and this would include food, medical care, et cetera, especially in a crisis situation as we have here. The problem is really that during the period in the Security Council, there were 3 pathways to provide aid to Syria during the conflict. Russia then vetoed those resolutions. So now there was only one route to provide humanitarian aid. That route has now been damaged by the earthquake. And so in order to force the provision of humanitarian aid, we would need a new Security Council resolution to create a new pathway. And the fear is, of course, that Russia will veto that again in support of its client state, Syria.
So, Ambassador, this obviously leads me into the important, well, the equally important conversation about holding Russia accountable for crimes inside Ukraine. But if you can't even get Russia in its diplomatic capacity to allow basic humanitarian aid into Syria, what hope do you have of holding them accountable for the direct accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity?
Indeed, there are now 3 pathways to justice that are operational. Number 1 is the courts in Ukraine. And as you mentioned, there's more than 65,000 incidents of war crimes and other potential atrocities that have been registered. The courts there are operational. There are war crimes teams. The international community, including the United States, have been funding the provision of experts who have come from the world's war crimes tribunals to assist the prosecutor general in this incredible challenge. Pathway number 2 is the International Criminal Court, also currently seized of this situation because Ukraine has consented to the exercise of jurisdiction. And then finally, you have European courts and legal authorities that are starting investigations, working through a joint investigation team, sharing information and strategies in order to be able to bring charges when perpetrators come within their jurisdiction. This, however, is the major challenge. As perpetrators remain in Russia, it will be very difficult for many of these justice pathways to operate unless in absentia trials are allowed. But none of these efforts require the consent of Russia, and so all of these investigations are moving forward.
So just quickly, will trials in absentia be allowed? Is there precedence for that?
There is precedent, and under the Ukrainian system, they are allowed, and there have been some cases. For example, some cases of sexual violence and other war crimes have been brought in absentia where a defendant was identified, but they did not have him in custody. The International Criminal Court, however, cannot exercise jurisdiction in absentia. All it can do is issue an arrest warrant and then ultimately confirm charges against an individual, but it cannot move forward without the custody of the accused.
Can I ask you about the various pathways, as you mentioned? There does seem to be, I'm not going to say hodgepodge, but an alphabet soup of different jurisdictions, from the Ukraine to the International Criminal Court, to Europe, etc. How does that help or complicate the efforts to streamline the pursuit of justice?
Indeed, I often get asked whether this is a chaotic situation, and the word I prefer is decentralized. There are a number of different nodes where justice is happening. The European authorities are increasingly united and coordinated amongst themselves under the umbrella of the Eurojust Genocide Network, but also this joint investigative team that many European states have joined that includes the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. So while there are a number of efforts happening around the world, they are increasingly coordinated and talking amongst themselves, sharing information, sharing potential evidence, all in the interests of justice.
What should people in Ukraine expect? What are the realistic expectations? We've talked about tens of thousands of allegations of crimes. We've talked about all the groups that are being funded and really seem to want to, including Ukrainian human rights and other groups inside the country there. And yet we know, I guess, from precedent that these processes take a very long time. What should people who've lost their family members or who've been violently attacked, sexually attacked, what should they expect realistically?
They should expect that the international community delivers justice wherever it can be found. This will involve cases in Ukrainian courts, and the prosecutor general will have the unenviable task of sifting through those 65,000 incidents and determining which ones there is sufficient evidence to prove, they have which ones the defendant is available, identifiable, and whether or not he can work up the chain of command in order to reach more senior figures who may have been the architect of violence. They should also expect the international community to support the International Criminal Court, which is exercising jurisdiction. The court has essentially global jurisdiction, a number of open investigations in other wartime and atrocity situations, and so it needs the assistance of the international community. A number of states have now seconded personnel, provided additional voluntary contributions, et cetera, to all of these justice efforts. So this is, as you mentioned, a daunting task. It's an intergenerational challenge, but there are no statutes of limitations for war crimes and other atrocities. And so we can be bringing cases for the next decade. There are still some cases being brought against living Nazis. One of the last cases that Germany brought was against a very elderly secretary who had been part of the Holocaust. And so we will be prosecuting these cases for many, many years to come.
Well, it's important to put it in that kind of historical and timeline context. But I want to ask you about the United States is obviously, and through your offices, prominent in the attempt to get justice. But you are not members of the ICC. What are the limits of what the U.S. can actually do?
Indeed, we have not ratified the treaty that created the International Criminal Court. But over the years, there have been many ways that we have been able to support the work of the court. This includes information sharing with the prosecutor. It includes issues of witness protection. We've helped to deliver 2 suspects to The Hague, one who showed up at our embassy in Kigali, Rwanda, asking to be brought to The Hague, and another who was found essentially fleeing in Central Africa. Both of those defendants have now gone before the court. Pardon me.
That's okay. They've gone before the court. I guess the big question for many Ukrainians and many people watching is, will Putin ever be charged? Will you be able to establish a chain of command and command responsibility? And if he is either publicly or secretly indicted, is there ever any realistic chance that he might be, brought before a court? I go back to Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic in Bosnia, who we followed the war crimes court against him at The Hague. And yeah, he was taken in, but he was arrested inside by his own people and then handed over. What do you think in Russia today?
Well, I don't think Slobodan Milosevic ever thought he would see the inside of a courtroom. He was obviously proven wrong. This will take time. There may require a political transformation within Russia such that he is no longer in power. It may involve finding jurisdiction over lower-level individuals first. We've seen a fair amount of schisms happening within the defense infrastructure of Russia, various generals being moved around as the strategic blunder of this war becomes more and more apparent, and that Russia fails to perform on the battlefield and, in fact, is performing quite poorly, and it has been associated with atrocities literally everywhere that Russia's forces have been deployed. And so some of these individuals may either be tossed out of the country or they may decide to leave on their own. or risk falling out of a window, for example, as we've seen. So eventually, courts will get jurisdiction over these perpetrators. And your mention of command responsibility is important because prosecutions can be brought against the direct perpetrators, but also against individuals up the chain of command who knew or should have known that their subordinates were committing abuses and who failed to take the necessary steps to either prevent those abuses or to prosecute those individuals after the fact. And so Putin could be prosecuted as a direct perpetrator for ordering these offenses or under this doctrine of command responsibility.
Let's just go to where you are right now. You're at Cox's Bazar, which is a world-known refugee camp. Most recently, it has all the refugees from Myanmar who also accuse the junta of terrible war crimes and want justice. You've said that Ukraine, or you wouldn't want Ukraine to suck all the energy and oxygen out of the accountability discussion. What is happening to bring accountability for the Myanmar refugees?
Indeed, part of the reason I am here is to deliver the message that the international community has not forgotten about the genocide that the Rohingya people experienced at the hands of the Myanmar military. Indeed, I'm at the largest refugee camp in the world. Upwards of 1 million individuals are here fleeing genocide in neighboring Myanmar. I met today with survivors and with their advocates, and every single one of them spoke about the importance of justice. There are, as in Ukraine, multiple different pathways to justice. There is a case that has been opened at the International Criminal Court because Bangladesh is a member of that statute. And so crimes of deportation that involve the crossing of an international border can be brought before the International Criminal Court. But also the Gambia, which is a West African nation, has brought suit against Myanmar for state responsibility for genocide under the Genocide Convention. That case is moving forward, and one of the women with whom I spoke had traveled to The Hague in order to support that case. In addition, we've seen Argentina, Germany, and other national courts open or entertain petitions by complainants, by victims, in order to potentially bring suit before their own national courts under principles of extraterritorial jurisdiction.
So the process
these cases
is
are all
moving
forward.
Yeah.
The process is moving, but the challenge remains the same of custody of the accused.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Ambassador Beth Van Schaack, thank you so much indeed for explaining all of that to us, especially on a day like this where accountability is in such focus.